All right, we are live. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone uh, for tuning in. We apologize. We had some technical difficulties and got stuck in some traffic trying to make it on to have reliable internet since we've been having some challenges in our local area. So I want to thank you all for sticking with us, checking this out. We're definitely going to be doing a series on this permanent forum and the Durban Declaration and Program of Action in the World Conference Against Racism, which we'll get into more of as we go along. And just want to get into it. I mean, I think there's a lot to report back, and to give you all a background for those of you who might not be familiar with this. And if you're not familiar with it, don't feel bad. The way our enemy is constructed, they don't want many people, particularly our people, to be aware of this. So that's one of the reasons why we're trying to bring this to you. But before going further, I want to thank Mama Efia for joining us today. If y'all are not familiar with Efia work, I would definitely implore you to get acquainted with it. The accolades I could come at you with would take probably this show to go through. And fortunately, she was able to go to Geneva to participate in this permanent forum because there were some problems with it, some serious problems with it, some of which forces like myself knew about, but some of which you had to be there to really get into. So without further ado, just want to start the conversation. And Efia, I think the first thing we probably need to do is just establish a baseline for everybody to understand what is this permanent forum, where it comes from. Just to folks are clear, and for folks to keep in mind, this was the first meeting of this permanent forum, so it's still new, it's still in its inception. Even though this is something that forces like myself, like Efia, and many others have been fighting for many a year. So if you don't mind, if you don't mind just giving a breakdown of what this permanent forum is, kind of its history and its background for the audience.
Well, the permanent forum for people of African or on people of African descent, and there's been a great deal of discussion as to whether it should be for people of African descent or on people of African descent. And it's been resolved as on people of African descent, because if it's for people of African descent, then it excludes other non-Africans, both in terms of participation and in terms of staff. I'm not sure that that's really true. And the decision, as I understand it, was made without general consultation, as is the case with most of the events surrounding the forum. The forum grows out of the 2001 global consensus that was reached at the Durban World Conference Against Racism, and as a part of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, in some degrees paralleling the mechanisms that were created for indigenous peoples, using that as a guide. The permanent forum of people of African descent was resisted by the United States and other European countries, former colonizers and enslavers, and their continuing effort to control today's Bandung-like global reparations-centered freedom movement. They set out to defeat the consensus that was reached in 2001. The forum, as presently constituted, is a mechanism designed by them to waylay, blunt, and bury the Durban Declaration and Program of Action with a hand-picked gatekeepers and the racist slur of anti-Semitism. In Durban, the world, we often hear the Europeans talk about the international community. Well, in Durban, the world, governments and civil society reached a consensus. And I think it's important to recognize that it's a consensus that was reached as opposed to a simple agreement. As we know, a consensus means that the participants all came to an intellectual, emotional, political commitment to a specific position, as opposed to a majority rule agreement. The consensus issued the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, or DDPA. The world declared colonialism, slavery, apartheid, and genocide crimes against humanity without statutes of limitation and the basis for reparations. In 2001, the United States, attending the conference at the outset, but led by then Secretary of State Colin Powell, walked out of the Durban World Conference Against Racism. The US and other European countries, former colonizers and enslavers, have worked to prevent the global consensus that was reached from being fully implemented, and they continue to work to undermine and to bury it. The forum is composed of 10 members, 5 nominated by states or governments, and 5 by the president of the Human Rights Council, in consultation purportedly with civil society. Now, there's no, as in the case of indigenous peoples, the consultation is limited to indigenous people. However, the consultation for the Forum on People of African Descent has no such limitation. While the US described how it pressured governments to vote for its pick, Justin Hansford, little or nothing is known about the appointments of the other members of the forum. The forum is located in Geneva in the office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, instead of the more accessible New York, and under the more appropriate Economic and Social Council. Mm-hmm. The chair of the forum is F.C. Campbell Barr, a former vice president of Costa Rica. Costa Rica is one of the world's smallest countries, an even smaller number of people of African descent. In fact, there are a little more than 400,000 people of African descent, including mixed race persons. The vice chair is Pastor Elias Murillo Martinez of Colombia. He's a lawyer with several past government posts. Colombia is second in geographical size to Brazil, with a Black population of less than 10%, including, quote unquote, mulattoes, raizals, and palaqueros. My apologies for mispronouncing that. The rapporteur is Michael McCutcheon, a Swede. He's a mixed race male of academic and activist. As of 2016, there are only 110,758 citizens of African nations residing in Sweden. Justin Hansford, the US member and representative, enjoying, like Clarence Thomas, the goodwill of the name of Thurgood Marshall, is the director of the Howard University Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. Hansford dismissed the DDPA by saying, "I was only 16 years old when it was written." Of course, we know that he wasn't even born when the US Constitution was written, and had he been, he would have been a slave. But he swears by it. Hansford reportedly believes that he can get a better deal than the DDPA. I reprimanded him publicly for trying to gaslight me and others when the chair refused to take floor responses to McCutcheon's attempt to limit the DDPA's relevance, saying, McCutcheon having said that the DDPA, to the extent it applied to African people or people of African descent, would be considered. Forum participants in person and virtual were urged to read the DDPA, as I reiterate here as well, were admonished not to let fancy, obscure language, lack of information, age, experience, and a short-term promise of an immediate bowl of porridge cause us to betray our peoples. All were challenged to fully claim, affirm, and assert the Durban Declaration and Program of Action as a human right of self-determination. I further reminded them that the Durban Declaration and Program of Action is actually the heart and soul of the forum. Without the DDPA, the forum is nothing more than a free trip and a talk fest. The Durban Declaration and Program of Action is our lifeline and that of generations unborn. We must hold on to it. I engaged the participants in chants of Black Power, Black is beautiful, all power to the people. They accepted with a standing ovation. The call for the fidelity to the DDPA rang out throughout the remaining 3 days. It was the idea and the commitment to the DDPA was repeatedly reiterated throughout the 4 days of the forum by both government officials and by members of the participants. And actually, members of I would say at least 2 members of the forum also reiterated the importance of the DDPA. One was Vereen Stevens, I believe is her last name, from Jamaica, a member of CARICOM, who is a fierce reparations activist. I think it's also important to note the fact that the December 12th movement, under the leadership of attorney Roger Wareham, led the movement for the reparations component of the DDPA and has remained engaged in the process of protecting and promoting it.
So, questions. Let's start with this claim made by Justin that he could get a better deal. Number one, to frame it as a deal is problematic. But number two, what did he think that he could get, and from who? Or was that stated, or was that outlined?
That was not stated in my presence. There was a very direct conversation that he had with a brother who is associated with N'Cobra. Sipiwe Baleke, I believe is the correct pronunciation of his
Mm-hmm.
name.
Mm-hmm.
And he directly challenged Justin on what Justin's position is with regard to the DDPA. He did not report Justin having come with any specifics about um, what he considered a better deal. I frankly view Justin as a young, naive, malleable, opportunistic careerist. Um, he knew when he took the position that the United States was opposed to the DDPA. He wants a second term, and he knows that he will not be renominated by the U.S. if he does not comply with the wishes of the U.S. government. So, given his ambitions, I fully expect him to continue to operate as white power in blackface with language using language of black liberation.
Well, I mean, for our audience, we want folks to grasp and understand that the DDPA, the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, is the outcome of agreements with nearly 200 nation states. That was the product of serious campaigning that took place, particularly in the 1980s and the 1990s, on an international level, some of which was coordinated and some of which wasn't, by various forces that were pushing reparations, like in Cobra, and or pushing for debt relief, right? And so you had the Jubilee campaign, which had a broad international character, particularly coming out of the African continent, which was pressing for debt relief and the forgiveness of all debts, particularly those imposed by the IMF and the World Bank during the crisis of the 1980s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, which forced all these structural adjustment programs on all the nations, who accepted these loans, but particularly the ones that were just devastating that happened on the African continent and Latin America in particular. And so it was this constellation of the social movements of around the world. This is one of those rare points, just so folks understand. It's one of these rare points where the social movements and the nation states actually converge, at least on a significant level, to come up with a line of agreement to be able to push something through the United Nations kind of form. So I'm going over this because to say that you can get a better deal when those social movements don't have the same strength, nor do they have the same alignment, is ahistoric to the max, and it doesn't really pretend to understand the nature of how we exercise power on our end, short of having nation state power, which the vast majority of us do not have, nor are we, those of us who live in these nation states, are adequately represented in this day and age anyway by most of these nation states in terms of our interests. Neocolonialism 2.0, as I think I heard Brother Gerald Horn talk so eloquently about a couple of days ago, is fully on the scene. And you see that, and I think on display to bring it home in this recent, I don't even know what to call it. They called it a summit, this U.S. Africa summit, basically, where the Biden administration brought most of the nations, representatives of the nation states. They excluded some for a number of different reasons. Zimbabwe was one that was excluded, for instance. And they basically just sat there without an agenda. They didn't have a preset agenda. They brought all these folks here, flew them all the way over here. Didn't have an agenda, didn't co-construct an agenda with them, and then just basically admonished them about y'all shouldn't do deals with China and Russia, and that we're going to come up with do you remember how much money it was? I think it was like 15, 20 billion or something like that.
It was, if my memory serves you right, it's 50 billion over 3 years, which wouldn't even be $1 billion per country.
Per country.
Of the 50, right.
Right. You know, and it was chump change. I mean, just look at how much money. Look at how much money, particularly in aggregate, over the course of the last 10 months, that they've given to Zelensky to engage in this inter-imperialist conflict with Russia, right? And including now, if you just count the price tag on some of the weaponry, like these Stinger missiles that they're offering, I mean, it dwarfs anything that they're talking about providing to the whole continent of Africa. So
it's insulting.
I mean, it's very insulting. And this thing that we can get something better than what's already there and what was fought for is a bit maddening. And I want folks to understand, like, you know, you might not, folks might not believe much in UN processes. Understandable, right? Just given the history, particularly how this is rolled, what role the UN has played in the world stage for the last 30 or 40 years. But I want you to know that what happened in South Africa in 2001, right? The Durban World Conference Against Racism, that was the third World Conference Against Racism. So those things don't come around that often, and they have to be fought for, right? And it's particularly the nations of what we call what we once called the third world, now many people call the global south. They had to push for that within that system. So there was one in the 70s, there was one in the 80s, and then there was this one that happened in 2001. And you got to ask yourself, why hasn't there been one since? Right? It's not like racism went anywhere. It's not like xenophobia has went anywhere. It's not like Zionism has went anywhere. How come there hasn't been one since? So if you hear me or other people who were there, and I happened to be in Durban in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism, and I counted as a high point in the people's struggle. Really, to me, was one of those. I don't know what your opinion of it is, Efia, but to me, it represented a critical shift in global movements. And if I could say, in part, that was the last move. That was the last gathering I've been to where it was a clear gathering of revolutionaries that was not dominated by NGO careers. That was the last one. Everything since has primarily been dominated by NGOs, not by movements and not by revolutionary forces.
In fact, that is true of the forum, the first session of the forum. And that's one of the things we need to change. But I would add this with regard to the Durban conference. I view it as a modern, an upgraded version of the Bandung conference, with that kind of political and historic significance, especially given the extent to which we were able to communicate and build community in that process. And even though many of the people who were involved in the process are no longer with us and or have been displaced, the fact of the experience itself lives on. And that is one of the most critical reasons why we have to hold on to the DDPA, because it gives us a point of reference for global unity. And it is also, in my opinion, one of the reasons why the West, the pan-Europeans, are so hostile towards it. We may not be able to speak the same language. We may not be able to, we may still be struggling with the stereotypes and the propaganda and the divide and conquer that we've all been subjected to. But all of that can be overcome if we hold on to the spirit of the Durban Declaration uh, and hold it as a standard and a manifestation of self-determination and demand and work for its full implementation.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to go to kind of a next step, if we can, Efia, because it's my understanding that this permanent forum, this body, is supposed to be meeting in New York in 2023. Can you give
Yes.
us just a short outline on that? And is this a point of intervention that we potentially can make, and if so, how?
I think we absolutely can, and indeed, I think we must. I will point out to you that we should shut down the forum 3 times. We took over the microphones and advanced the will of the people. The first instance was where we led the floor, enforcing the moderator to allow an oxygen tank dependent hotel bound participant to speak longer than the prescribed 2 minutes. This sister had come to the headquarters, to the UN headquarters, but because the distance from the gate to the meeting place was so grave, she was forced to return to her hotel, and in fact was overcome with the exertion to the extent that she wound up spending 2 days in bed. And arrangements were made for her to be able to her call in to be taken, and the Chinese member of the uh, forum decided to cut her off. At that point, we demanded that she be allowed to speak, and she spoke as long as she felt that she needed to. The second instance was when we possibly mistakenly forced the moderator to allow the ICERD committee member, Gabe McDougall, to complete a recommendation regarding the proposed Declaration of Rights of People of African Descent, and McKetchen's DDPA Forum Working Group proposal. She apparently is developing a draft, which has not been made public. One, and two, McKetchen, at the outset of the following the state report, and let me say this before I forget it, and you can come back to it. They lumped reparations and climate change together. So I want to come back to that and talk about that, especially with regard to COP27. So we again took over the mic. No, you have to let her finish speaking. Well, McKetchen's thing is that he as rapporteur should be allowed to create a working group which will control the writing of the Declaration of Rights of People of African Descent, as well as the role that the DDPA will, the degree to which it will be incorporated. And then finally, we organized another shutdown, which we had anticipated, since they did not put out a sign-in sheet to follow McKetchen's quote unquote interim report. We figured that they were just going to brush it aside, say it's in the report, and on that basis, we would have to wait until they publish whatever it was that they wanted to publish, which he specifically referred to the DDPA as having limited significance to the forum, and its application would be only to the extent that it applied to people of African descent. Now, how he proposes to separate it out and alienate it and dissect it and such, is an issue that we have to challenge. However, and Gay McDougall was going along with that. So since we figured that they were not going to take comments from the floor, we a group of us who have been organizing throughout the 4 days situated ourselves around the room and began to say we had an objection, that we wanted to speak as soon as he finished. And the chair's position was, well, we're not going to take any comments from the membership, from the states, or from the floor. At which we just said, no, we want to speak. We don't care if the other people don't speak. We want to speak. So she acquiesced and asked if there were members of the forum who wanted to speak. And Justin pipes up that we should be patient, that it's just an interim report. There's a meeting. The second session will be held in New York, the end of May. I believe it's May 28th through June 2nd. And we could say whatever we wanted to say at that point. And we, of course, began to shout him down as well. And then other members, the ambassador from, I think it's Jamaica, he joined in with Justin saying that we should wait, and that he thought that since it's just an interim report, that we would have ample opportunity. We shouted him down. And then that she wanted some other government, invited other government representatives to speak, who at that point understood that there was no point in them trying to speak because we weren't having it. So as she attempted again to close it down, I took over the mic, and we had a joint statement, which I was assigned to read. And in that joint statement, I said, to take the floor, I said, Justin Hansford, you will not patronize me, nor will the chair ignore me, and proceeded to read the statement. And the statement that I read was, sisters and brothers, I am new African colonized in the USA. My name is Efia Nwangaza, founder director of the Malcolm X Center for Self-Determination, member of the Black Belt Human Rights Coalition, Criminal Punishment System Subcommittee, and Black Alliance for Peace. I am a veteran of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. It is the organization that laid the foundation for today's Black Lives Matter movement, and in its 1966 call for Black Power and declaration that Black is beautiful. As a member of the USA Durban 400 delegation, I attended the 2001 delegation Durban World Conference Against Racism, a global gathering much like this. And I continued on with, again, saying that the Durban Declaration Program of Action is the heart and soul of the forum, and without it, the DDPA is nothing more than a free trip and a talk fest, and again, received rousing support. So at that point, they were completely at a loss. So I think that there is a sentiment, I think there is a momentum, and I think that on that basis, there is an opening to direct the next steps of the forum in a way that is more consistent and conducive to the needs and the spirit of the Durban Declaration and program of action. I think that what we have to do from here forward is to create popular forms, like a 2-pager that can be widely disseminated, that gives the history of the Durban Declaration, why it's important, and what it specifically lays out. in such a way that the average person can appreciate it, and to do webinars more extensive than but along the lines of what we're doing here, and to invite individuals and organizations to participate in it, and attend it, and to begin a process of popular education throughout. I think that with that, especially since it's in New York and there is no registration fee, that we will be able to bring to New York a delegation, a national delegation that will advance the Durban Declaration, and to make it very clear that we're not going to tolerate the effort to sideline it. I think that also to recognize the fact that the decade of people for people of African descent is 2 years ending, that we take advantage of that. There were people who are asking, in fact, one member, the vice chair of the forum, is asking for a second decade. There doesn't seem to be any serious likelihood of that occurring, and whether it does or not, we still need to make the best of the next 2 years so that we make sure that when the machinery is in place for full implementation, including funding. That was another point that we were successful on, and that is that no funds were made available for a Portuguese translator. And by the second day, that one had been hired and was in place. So it's malleable, it's susceptible to input, and I think that we have to be clear about what it is that we want and plan and implement our own agenda.
Well, we got some work to do, I think, to get there between now and the end of May. So, one of the things for our audience to know is we already started to work on a broader kind of educational piece with members of BAP, D12, that we're going to be doing in January to go over this in some more detail, and definitely going to be taking up this work in broad coalition. So if folks want to get involved with this, we encourage you to definitely stay in contact with the Cooperation Jackson, with the Malcolm X Center for Self-Determination, with Efia's organization in South Carolina, and other organizations like the Black Alliance for Peace, which are going to continue to do work on this in the course of the next months and some time after that, because this struggle is going to go on. We're not going to resolve all these issues in May. I want folks to be very clear about this and how these processes work. Any closing thoughts, Efia, before we wrap up for the day and pick up with part 2 next month?
I am frankly quite optimistic, despite the slow grind of UN work. I think one point of importance is the preservation, as I said earlier, of the spirit of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. I've done a number of interviews at this point and received significant feedback and interest. And I think that will only grow with our building the awareness and the efforts on the part of pan-Euro powers to quash it and to substitute the forum for the DDPA and to
Mhm.
presume to write a Declaration of Rights of people of African descent without engaging a cross section of people of African descent.
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, these people who are allowing themselves to be manipulated, to allowing themselves to be used as white power in blackface, which seems to be the order of the day. Um, Also, they need to be called out, and that's why I insist upon calling out Justin Hansford, urging people to call the Howard University Law School and to challenge him specifically. What kind of deal does he think that he can get that has other folk with more experience, more influence, uh, were unable to get? That he can unite the quote unquote what we used to call the non-aligned world,
Mhm.
um, to advance the interests of oppressed people around the world. I think that he should be forced to answer that question directly. So I'm very optimistic, and I look forward to our building this movement, and fulfilling Malcolm's dream that the global Black world will come together in a meaningful liberation struggle, that we will
Mhm.
turn flag independence into substance, despite the fact that neocolonialism seems to be the order of the day. In our heart of hearts, we all know that something is different. There was the sister who was unceremoniously removed as the U.S. ambassador to the for the Africa group, um, made a very telling observation of what some have characterized
However.
as Uncle Tom meets Uncle Sam summit,
Mhm.
and compared it with the kind of summits that the United States arranges with those for whom it has respect, namely other white governments, and the kind of interaction that goes on between African states and China and Russia in, as you referenced, the co-work in establishing an agenda and being able
Mhm.
to set their own priorities. I think that she would be a very interesting person for us to engage, and to bring those voices back into the house.
Yeah, we got some work to do to explain all this. One of the things you mentioned that we got to come back to, one of our next segments is how they were trying to lump reparations um, with like
Yes,
climate change.
please,
Because that the piece that
please.
they had come to ask me to do was specifically about climate change. That
Okay.
they had invited me, to come do, and I know that they don't have any money or resources or that much, but they were saying that they didn't
Mm,
have any resources, to get me over there to play the role, particularly of a rapporteur.
mm,
And
mm,
I know better how that system
mm,
works, but was going to go anyway, as you know, but the folks know, specifically to go fight for the DDPA, despite all the games that were kind of clearly being played. But there's been a process since the last meeting that they had in 2019 of excluding people, including myself and many others, from
mm,
the kind of the proceedings and the meetings specifically because they knew that we were advocates for the DDPA, would not let that go. So very proud to hear about the interventions that you all were able to make, and to let us know that, because one of the things that they're going to try to do is they're going to try to proceed as if none of that happened, and
Exactly.
bury that happened. But you heard it here. It's on the record. We can get others to validate and pick that up. So as we continue our work on this course, I want you all to remember that, so it doesn't just get buried and thrown under the rug, and they just think that they can proceed anywhere that they want to, because that's not going to happen at this point forward. But definitely want everybody to do, if you've never heard of the DDPA, which is the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, please go look it up and read it, and understand why we are pressing for it. Not just the reparations piece. That enough. It would be enough, I think, to support it, but it's much more than that. Check out also the works that happened with the People Summit, because there was two that happened there. There was a People Summit that happened before, and then there was the official UN Summit. And it was at the People Summit where we gathered to really set out and lay the pressure that we were going to apply on the nation states that did come, and that produced some very significant works. So I want folks to look that up. There's a video, if you can find it, and I'll see if we can get maybe D12 to maybe put it up online. But there was a video called the Durban 400, which documented the effort made by December 12th movement to bring 400 of our folks, primarily New Africans, housed in the United States, to bring them over to really do some hardcore pressing and lobbying work. And it shows some of the live moments wherein people like Viola, people like Roger Williams played some very key, Brother Chimaranga, who rest in peace. Some of the key role that they played, they got captured on film, struggling with some of our allies, particularly on the African continent, to make sure that some of this key language got inserted in some of the process of how that went down. I think it's a good movement tool for folks, maybe like a Justin, to have watched and understood, the kind of intergenerational fight that went on to get us to that point and get us to that moment. So these are some resources. There's other things that are out there, but these are resources that people can look up, I think, online and find. And we'll try to make sure that that last piece of it's not up on YouTube or something like that now, and see if we can get it up. I think, it's been 20-something years. So it is up?
The movie is on Vimeo.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, good. Okay. I'll try to find a link and put it on Facebook, and we'll put some resources up and out there for folks to check that out. But I want everybody to do your homework, because we're going to be coming back to this and familiarize yourself with this work. As I mentioned at the onset, there's a reason why this has been buried. One of the reasons why most folks have not heard about this, the conference ended literally 2 days before September 11th happened. And that effectively killed a lot of the momentum that the movements had, and it kind of rewrote the global, playbook and reasserted for a period U.S. military dominance in all the terms of imperialism. But the fight did continue, particularly the piece around reparations. So don't get this notion that was it Tanishi Coates was responsible for reviving that movement, because he got some mainstream coverage in the Atlantic or whatever. I forget the outlet. That work had been going on, by in COBA, by brothers and sisters in the global African movement, reparations movement over in the UK, and many others that we can cite. So stay tuned. I don't know if you got any last words, Efia.
Let me just stick this in with regard to the movement for reparations. The movement for reparations has gone on ever since the Civil War in this country ended. Right. Isaiah I can't think of his last name, and oh God, and his
Kali
partner,
House. Yeah.
exactly, Callie House, wound up being imprisoned as a way of suppressing
Hmm.
the reparations movement. They called it called it a pension fund. They were that's all they
Right.
were just asking for folks who had fought in the Civil War or served in the Civil War, both as soldiers and nurses, to be compensated to have a pension. And Cobra, of which I'm a co-founder, began in 1987. So no, Ta-Nehisi Coates is not the father of the modern reparations movement.
Hmm. Hmm. Queen Mother Moore. We can go on.
Mm,
it's a long list on
yeah,
this. Yeah. So,
exactly.
all right. Want to thank you, Efia, for taking the time. Thank everybody who tuned in. Sorry we had to reschedule this, but you see, we stuck with it. Be persistent. We'll definitely be back in January with another round of discussion to bring in some more folks, as we mentioned. So stay tuned for that. And signing out. Free to land.
Thank you. Thank you.